morning and the next few mornings is on the theme of personalities from Ramayana. Everyone's familiar with Ramayana, one of the principal itihasa literatures within the Vedic texts. Of course, in one sense, the Vedic texts are eternal and given by Bhagavan. Dharmam hi sakshat bhagavat pranitam. However, this one portion of the Vedic literature is not compiled by Vyas. It's compiled by Valmiki, and the understanding is that Ramayana is also eternal. It's described by Madhvacharya in the heavenly realm. Ramayana is 1 billion verses. The eternal Ramayana, because Ram is one of the principal incarnations of the Supreme Lord. And that was narrated in full to Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma narrated it in part to Narada. Narada narrated it in further part to Valmiki, and Valmiki compiled it. So I'll repeat. The Ramayana is eternal. And as Vyasa wrote, Valmiki also wrote or compiled a portion of that which is eternal, the Ramayana. That's the understanding that our acharyas have given us, specifically Madhvacharya. And the role of Valmiki in Ramayana is obviously particularly important because he's the compiler. So let us begin by taking a look. Now it's not moving, huh? What's the reason it's not moving? It's not escaping either.
Close it and open it again.
Okay.
Stop sharing. Did that happen last time?
What?
Okay.
Oh. What are you doing?
I need to share the screen. I did not share the screen. You explained it.
Okay. There's a nice sketch or line drawing of Valmiki. So he's the compiler of Ramayana. Later today, I'll be sending to somebody a list, a document that shows the various authorized Ramayanas that you'll find in this world today. When you read in the 9th canto of the Bhagavatam about Sukadeva Goswami speaking about Ramayana or Ram's Leela. He says to Maharaj Parikshit, I'm only going to narrate those authorized versions, which means there's authorized and then there's unauthorized. So the document I'll be sending out, likely today, will be a list of some of the standard, accepted by Vaishnava Acharyas versions of Ramayana, and some of the principal ones with their likenesses and differences. And I'll make reference in this morning class about some different points of view of the lineage of Valmiki. Common in the world is Valmiki previously was the dacoit named Ratnakar. And then things happened and he became Valmiki by the influence of Narada. Well, don't be surprised that there are different descriptions of Valmiki's ancestry or lineage, and it does not include his being a dacoit. Here's the Srimad Bhagavatam picture. You'll see at the top, there's Varuna. And Varuna, his descendancy or his ancestry, he was the son of Kashyapa. Kashyapa is one of the direct sons of Brahma. So Brahma, Kashyapa, and Kashyapa received a number of the daughters of Daksha as wives, and Aditi was one of them. And between the combination of Kashyapa and Aditi, there were sons of Varuna. Varuna was one of their sons. The 9th son, as you know, there were demigods who were sons of Aditi, and Varuna was number 9. Varuna married Karshni, you're seeing on the chart here, and there were 2 sons born of Karshni. One is Bhrigu, and the other was Valmiki. Now this is the Bhagavatam version. The son of Varuna, the son of Varuna. So there's another son of Varuna that came as a result of Urvashi, and there's a nice story described in the Bhagavatam. Vishishta was born from a pot. So here in this chart, we're seeing, and we will go there a little bit further, Valmiki was the son of Varuna. Now here's some description from Valmiki Ramayana, where Valmiki is describing himself in the Uttarakhanda. He's speaking to Ram. He's the 10th son of Varuna. And earlier in the Uttarakhanda, he says, thus was sung the Ramayana by the mighty son of Varuna. So that's Valmiki, the mighty son of Varuna. And also in Uttarakhanda, Valmiki, in discussing with Ram, confirms that he has lived a pure life, never committed any sin. And this is said in the context that he's speaking the truth, and the truth is Sita is pure. He's confirming with Lord Ram, Sita is faultless. But he never committed any sin. So that's a little different than the version that we're used to hearing, the Ratnakar version, the dacoit version. So now we have some alignment between the Bhagavatam and Valmiki Ramayana. He's the son of Varuna. And how does this work? In a commentary, I'll also send out a document, a little bit of biography of Govindaraj. He was a Sri Vaishnava who lived a long time after Ramanujacharya, and the followers of Ramanujacharya. He gathered together commentaries made by Sri Vaishnavas and assembled them in a commentary. And he writes, as you see below, on the very first verse of Valmiki Ramayana. All through the countless years, trees and shrubs sprang about him, while an immense anthill rose on all sides, completely concealing him from view. Later on, Varuna, the Lord of the waters, sent down heavy rains, which dissolved the strange tenement. Coming out of it, the gods hailed him as the son of Varuna, as Valmiki. So this is Govindaraj's explanation of how what Ramayana says and what the Bhagavatam says is Valmiki is the son of Varuna. Now, there's other versions, more popular, at least in the world. The Brahmanda Purana and the Skanda Purana speak of Valmiki, the compiler of the Ramayana, having his ancestry as being previously Ratnakara, dacoit. Most of us, probably most of you, are familiar with this story. And in the story, Narada one time was passing through a forest area, and as he was passing underneath a tree, the dacoit Ratnakar was hiding to plunder persons who would pass through his way. And he jumped in front of Narada and was ready to kill him with his weapon and give me all your money. He felt something by the presence of Narada, so he didn't immediately plunder him, but that was his activity, that was his lifestyle. And sometimes it's described this way with bow and arrow, but he met Narada in the forest. And Narada said, "I'm sorry, sir, I don't have any wealth, but let me ask you a question." What's that? And the man became submissive because of the presence of Narada. So Narada said, "Your plundering of people in this way has consequences. And why are you doing this?" And he had some discussion where Narada is giving him some instruction. And Narada's instruction was, "You're responsible for your misdeeds. And why are you doing this?" And his explanation was, it was his livelihood to maintain his family. You see below, there's lots of children in his family. So Narada said, "You go back and ask your family if they're willing to take responsibility for your misdeeds, if they're going to share in the karma for your misdeeds." And Ratnakar, having now some faith in Narada, he went back to his family and he asked them if they would share the sinful reactions resulting from killing animals, etc., for maintaining the family. And their answer was no. And his response was, "Well, I'm doing this for you." And their answer was no. So he, Ratnakar, returned to Narada and wanted to know from Narada what to do. You know, this celebrated story. So Narada told him to chant Ram's name. However, Ratnakar was so sinful he couldn't chant Ram's name. And so he took it backwards and Mara, 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 which eventually became Rama. So Ratnakar sat down and absorbed himself in chanting Ram's name. We all know this story. And he became motionless. In the course of time, some white ants started eating away at his body, and he continued chanting Ram's name, and that went on for a long time. He eventually became covered by an anthill. After some time, Narada came back to see what Ratnakar would be doing. Narada, this narration wasn't Varuna. Narada sprinkled some holy water, dissolving the anthill, and blessed Ratnakar and gave him the name Valmiki, which means arising from white anthill. Now, this doesn't speak of him as being the son of Varuna, because Varuna, or Valmiki in Ramayana, says he was sinless. It's another version, and one can take it. One way to these different versions can be processed is it's describing a different day of Brahma. In a different day of Brahma, there's some variation on the themes of the Supreme Lord. So here's Valmiki emerging from an anthill as Narada came by. He couldn't find Ratnakar, but he heard the sound of Ram's name and he followed it and came to an anthill. The sound was coming from the anthill. This is a place commemorating where this occurred. Now, I'm not going to narrate because it's really long, but there's a second. Valmiki was a hunter and a dacoit, found in Untitled Ramayana. And it's very interesting. It ends up the same. He becomes freed from his sin by the benefit of chanting Ram's name. And I'll send that out because to narrate the whole thing, it would take a while. Now we have Valmiki as the realized person, absorbed in Ram's name, very dedicated in bhakti to Ram. And we find Narada again visits the ashram of Valmiki. There we see on the right side, that's Narada. And there's Valmiki sitting next to the cottage, and some other person, an assistant or associate or something, with Valmiki. Later, Bhardraj Muni becomes involved with Valmiki. And the very beginning this is now Valmiki Ramayana, the very first section mentions their meeting, and then Valmiki asks a series of questions. And there's a number of characteristics of an ideal person, or even specifically an ideal hero. And they're listed. Valmiki wants to know who is such a person. And Narada responds by, in a summary way, narrating a contemporary of Valmiki was Lord Ram. And there we see on the left side, the painting is Narada with his Veena. And on the left side is Valmiki asking questions, and they're speaking about Ram and Sita. So Narada, gives a mini summary of the entire Ramayana in Valmiki Ramayana. And where did Narada hear this from? He heard it from Brahma. Where did Brahma hear it from? From the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And a very lengthy description 1 billion verse description from Lord Brahma. Then, in the course of that conversation, Narada Muni gives an instruction to Valmiki, that is to meditate on the Supreme Lord with full concentration and write Ramayana, the pastimes that he realizes in his meditation. Something not so dissimilar from the instruction that Narada gave to Vyasa. Here's a nice painting. It's on the left side of our painting. It's Narada speaking and Valmiki asking. There's some students or some assistants seated nearby that are also participating. Then Narada is bidding farewell, and Valmiki is offering respects to the lotus feet of Narada, and in the upper right, Narada is departing. So Valmiki follows the indication of Narada, and he begins to prepare himself. Now, on the right side, we see this celebrated event that comes in Valmiki Ramayana, where Valmiki, along with Bhardraj Muni, went to a different river than he used to bathe, and when he was preparing to bathe, he saw two cruncha birds, and the two cruncha birds were mating, and as he was appreciating the scene, an arrow shot into the body of the male, and he fell into the river. And seeing that misfortune of the cruncha bird, Valmiki uttered this celebrated verse that then later became the foundation or basis of the whole Ramayana. So as Valmiki was pondering, why did this anger arise from me? Because he's a self-realized person who's not controlled by anger. But he became, at least for that moment, controlled by anger. And as he was pondering on the verse that he spoke, it was repeated and repeated and repeated in his mind. And he came to understand that there's this very special purpose for the whole of Ramayana in this sound vibration. Later, Brahma comes and confirms, it is I who inspired that anger. It is I who inspired this particular verse. And I want you to compile, just as Narada indicated, the whole story of Lord Ramachandra. Now here we see Brahma's visit again on the left-hand side. And Valmiki later being visited by Sita. Of course, that's much later in the Ramayana. Brahma blesses, this poem will be flawless. For as long as mountains and rivers flourish on earth, the legend of Ram will flourish in this world. And for as long as the Ramayana flourishes, the world will know and celebrate you along with the Ramayana. So although there are these different versions, we're going to hear tomorrow morning some further accepted versions of Ramayana. In the background, you can see the hunter by the river, and you can see the two cruncha birds and so forth, that which inspired Valmiki to speak as he spoke. A couple of details, and we're winding to a close. According to the Vayu Purana, Valmiki was Vedavyas in the 24th Chatra Yuga. Chatra Yuga means the cycle of 4 yugas. So during Vaivasvata Manu, we're currently in the 24th Chatur Yuga, and the 27th, and he appeared as Vedavyas. This is to say, at the end of every Dwapara Yuga, someone takes the post of Vyasadeva. Our current Vyasadeva is Krishna Dvaipayana Vyas. But every end of Dwapara Yuga, in each of the Yuga cycles during a particular Manu, someone takes that post. So Vayu Purana, at least, speaks of Valmiki taking that post in the 24th Yuga cycle of Vaivasvata Manu. In Laghu Bhagavatamrita, which is a book by Rupa Goswami, our celebrated Rupa Goswami, he writes the following about Ram's appearance. Splendid as a new blade of Durva grass, and accompanied by Sumitra's two sons and by Bharata, Rama appeared in the Treta Yuga, of the 24th Chatur Yuga as the son of Koshali and Dasara. So there's some symmetry with what Vayu Purana and what Laghu Bhagavatamrita says. So, I don't know about you, but I was always under the impression, wrongly, that in this particular 24th Yuga cycle, when Krishna appears, that's the same Yuga cycle when Ram appears. And according to Rupa Goswami, who we accept the authority of, it wasn't during this present Yuga cycle. It was the 24th Yuga cycle, or Chatur Yuga, in Treta Yuga, that Ram appeared. The Valmiki Ramayana is the version of Ramayana that we hold as the gold standard. Sometimes it's spoken of that way. In the other Ramayanas, Valmiki is the author or compiler. And the main difference, well, one of the main differences is his ancestry. Was he this or was he that? Was he a sinless son of Varuna, or was he a dacoit? And then in the narration itself, there's some variations. And again, I'll send you some document that can be circulated amongst the online listeners so you can get some picture. Now, it's 8 o'clock. So I think what I might do is read through this Ananda Ramayana version. We'll go back. Where there's a second description of Valmiki being a dacoit. Here we go. Where is it? There. I'm just going to read. It has to do with a Brahmana named Sankha. Once upon a time, there lived on the shores of Lake Pampa a Brahmana, Shankha by name, journeying through the pathless woods that covered the banks of the Godavari. A fierce-eyed hunter sprang at him. This is a Brahmana, not Narada. And robbed him of all his clothes and ornaments and water pot and even the leather sandals of the unfortunate Brahmana. It was midsummer and the sun was high in the heavens. His pitiless rays beat down on the head of the poor Shankha. The red-hot sand burnt his tender feet to the very bone. He folded the rags that the cruel, merciless hunter left him and stood on them while the forest solitudes resounded with his screams of agony. The iron heart of the hunter grew soft towards him. I did the right thing, the hunter said to himself, in depriving the poor fellow of what he had. It is but exercise of my duty and hereditary calling. But let me earn some small merit by giving him my old sandals. Shanka was profuse in his gratitude. May all good go with you. Verily, it is some good karma of the past life that puts into your head the idea of making a present of a pair of sandals to a poor wayfarer, and that too when he needs it the most. The hunter was curiously affected with the prophetic words of the Brahmana. Good sir, may I know what merit I've accrued in a former birth? Alas, replied Shanka, the fierce sun almost melts my poor brains. My tongue cleaves to my mouth from dire thirst. Is this a place to dilate upon old world stories? Take me to some cool, shady spot where I may rest my poor limbs. A ray of pity illuminated the dark recesses of the hunter's heart. Gently he led Shanka to the cool waters of the lake, and the Brahmana plunged into it. He performed his midday prayers, offered due worship to the devatas, the pitris, and the sages. Meanwhile, the hunter busied himself in providing his late victim with sweet fruits and roots. Shanka partook of them and quenched his thirst in the limpid lake. He sought the leafy shade of a hospitable tree where the hunter followed him. Shankar said, now I will reveal unto you some glimpse of your checkered past. Now it gets complicated. There lived an old Brahmana named Stamba in the Srivatsa Gotra. He lived in a town named Sala, along with his beautiful wife, Kanti Mai, a model of wifely virtues and wholehearted devotion. But the wayward heart of the man turned away from her. And he so forgot himself and the duty he owed to a lady and his wife, and instead brought home a promiscuous lady. Stamba was fully enamored by the smile of the prostitute. Although outraged, Kanti Mai remained loyal to her unworthy husband. She was most assiduous in attending to the comforts of the man and his paramour. She anticipated their least wishes, supremely content if she could thereby win back her husband's love. Years passed away, and Stamba suffered the torments of hell even before he reached it, in the shape of a cruel disease that made his days and nights one long agony. The prostitute quietly robbed him of all the wealth that he had and sought another, more congenial companion for her pleasure. Stamba came to know it, and in his bitterness of his heart, he called down the deadliest curses upon the prostitute and upon himself for having abused his wife's loyalty and love by saying, I stand alone in the world and helpless. I have willfully destroyed every chance of deserving any help from you or sympathy. My treatment of you was simply abominable. I placed the harlot in the sacred seat of the wedded wife. I rejoiced to see the pure hands of my life's partner serve all meekly the unclean animal I had taken to my heart. Cruel were my words to you, and crueler my behavior. The holy books tell us that the husband who wrings the heart of his loyal wife is doomed to the miserable lot of a eunuch for 17 births. But Kanti Mai lifted hands of appeal to him and cried, Lord of my heart, your handmaiden is ever at your service. She is yours to command now and ever. You shall not lack for any sympathy or service that my poor self can render. It is strange that you should feel shamefaced to ask it of me. Never did the slightest shadow of resentment darken my heart against you. As for what you said about my cheerless life, I do not know that I only pay back what I owed in my former birth. I made my bed and I must lie upon it. And when a dutiful wife known to be otherwise than loyal and loving to her Lord, forthwith she sped to her parents and got from them the wherewithal to provide for his wants and necessities. One hot day in June, Devala the sage crossed the threshold of the humble pair and requested hospitality. Kanti Mai turned to her husband and said, this holy man is a master physician. I am sure that he will relieve you of your cruel disease, if he is so minded. Thus, she played upon his intense selfishness and unconsciously persuaded him to welcome the sage. She washed his scorched feet with cool water, placed the seat for him, fanned his weary limbs, and when he had rested a while, entertained him with the very best of her humble abode afforded. The water that washed his feet, she took to her husband and said, this is a very potent medicine and will not fail. Samba eagerly drank it in one gulp. At last, the disease ate into his vitals and he became delirious with pain. She procured some medicine and was trying to force it into his mouth when the man was seized with terrible convulsions and expired, biting off the finger of the poor Kanta Mai. She sold her ornaments and jewelry, bought fragrant wood with it, placed her unworthy husband upon it, set fire to the same, and lay by his side in sweet content and supreme peace in her heart. She reached the heavenly realm. But the dominating tendency of his life asserted itself in the last moment, and the prostitute was in his mind at the time of death. That Stamba was reborn as a hunter, and you are that hunter. The prostitute who was your partner has now been born as your wife. Since you consented, unconsciously though, to welcome and entertain the Rishi Devala, a ray of pity, a flash of something noble crossed your dark heart and induced you to relieve my sufferings and make a gift to me of your old shoes. The holy water that washed the feet of the sage has purified your unclean spirit, and you have been privileged to hear from me the details of your former life. In the last moment of your previous life, you bit off the finger of your faithful wife. Now, You live upon the flesh of slain beasts. You died in your bed, and now the earth is your only bed. Now I reveal to you what will befall you hereafter. He opened the eyes of the hunter to his next birth, instructed him in the right way of spending the holy month of Vaishakha. The hunter, now extremely repentant, gave back to his benefactor the articles which he had dispossessed him, and saw him safely out of the dark woods. The unexpected turn thus given to his life was productive of very favorable results. In his next life, the hunter entered the semen of the sage Krinu and spent many years in severe austerities on the bank of a beautiful lake. A forest-dwelling female swallowed the semen of sage Krinu, and the hunter took birth in her womb in his next life. The child, that's the hunter in his previous birth, was brought up by rude hunters and took their ways of living. He mated with a woman of the lower classes and had many children through her. He organized a gang of footpads, waylaid the travelers, and lived upon his ill-gotten gains. One day, 7 sages, this is not Narada, but 7 sages, chanced to pass through the forest. Our Brahmana hunter promptly held them up. Revered sirs, none pass this way without paying me toll. It is my duty to collect the toll, as I have to support my wife and younger ones. So I request you to transfer all valuables that you may have. The Holy One smiled in pity and said, my good man, please yourself, but do us a slight favor. Go home and put to your wife and children the following question. You share with me the gains of my calling, do you not? Will you take a share of the retribution natural to such a life of lawlessness and cruelty as I lead? Fear not, but we will remain here even until you come back with their answer. And they bound themselves by the most solemn oaths. The hunter could not clearly explain to himself what they were after. But such a simple request did not deserve to be refused, so he went home and put the question to his wife and children. But they laughed in his face and cried, are you gone mad? Who can deny that we have a right to share of your earnings, but as to share the results of your crimes, why, the very idea is supremely absurd. The hunter was dazed with surprise at this outburst of frank selflessness. The holy presence of the sages purified his nature and brought out its nobler instincts. So back he sped to where his strange visitors were. Tears of repentance and grief streamed down his rugged face as he clasped their feet and exclaimed in despair, Lords of compassion, blind have I been until now. A life of cruelty and inequity did I lead. And when back upon the noble traditions of the Brahmanas to whom I belong by birth, I have run through the entire gamut of crime, etc., etc. Please help me. So they told him to chant Ram's name. We instruct you in the mystery of this powerful mantra, but as long as you have a long course of purification to go through, you cannot receive it as it is. We shall reverse it for you. Meditate upon it with your heart and soul, day and night, until we come back. So that's their story. The Ananda Ramayana version. And we know what the rest happens. So different versions of how Valmiki became the author of Ramayana and became so fixed in devotion to Lord Ramachandra. So I'm looking at the clock. It's now 20 after 8. And if there's some questions, I guess whoever's participating in this can unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can send something to the chat box.
There's a question.
Oh, Hare Krishna.
When this was happening, like when Ramayana was happening, was Valmiki writing or after Ramayana?
There's different explanations, but one of those explanations is it happened after, or it happened during, because he was compiling when Lava and Kush arrived and he taught them. Another version is he was compiling during the course of Ram's life. The next place we find Valmiki mentioned is when Ram is going in exile and before he reaches Chitrakoot, he goes to the ashram of Valmiki. So they met, not just in his meditation, but they met directly. There's different explanations. During his life, but exactly when during his life. I see something in the chat box. Let's see what's there.
They're just asking if there is a question.
Oh, okay. While we're waiting, I'll just let you know, tomorrow we'll speak about Hanuman part 1, because there's so much to say about Hanuman. In the middle part of October, something like around 20 classes will be covering personalities from Ramayana. So I'll be in Portland, and you can find out that information however you find out those kinds of things. So we'll go into detail. This is just a way to help me get myself ready for this very involved series of discussing personalities from Ramayana.
There is an online question
Okay.
from Sneha Valididi.
Okay.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, in one of the slides, we saw Mother Sita meeting Valmiki. Could you please share details of the meeting?
Yeah, it's when she was sent to his ashram. After back in Ayodhya, after the exile and so forth. And she is sent by Ram through Lakshman to Valmiki's ashram. That's the situation, much later.
Did Valmiki write any other shastras apart from Ramayana?
I don't know. I not heard of anything other than Ramayana. His absorption was Ram. It's an interesting question, but I don't know of anything other than Ramayana. Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.